Neil Medwed of Meriplex joins this week to talk about news from Datto and ConnectWise, Azure management, and solving the IT skills gap, plus a special guest interview with America's CFO at TD SYNNEX, David Jordan, on underappreciated M&A options. It's ChannelPro Weekly number 254. Yeehaw! Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode number 254. My name is Matt Whitlock, editor, online director, and your host of this show for people like you. And if you're listening on your phone or watching on YouTube, you might be wondering who you are. If you really are wondering who you are, you might need to go and get some professional help or see a doctor or a psychiatrist. But I will give you a couple clues. One, you are into the technology space, helping other businesses with their technology needs. That means you're a managed services provider, you're a VAR, you're an IT reseller, you're an IT consultant, you are a system builder, you're an IT admin, you're all of those things. But it has to do with technology, and it has to be doing it with other businesses. That is some of you. It's probably not all of you, but that's a good chunk of you. Joining me this week and most weeks is the man of the hour, the guy who keeps the trains running here on time at ChannelPro, executive editor Rich Friedman. Welcome, Rich.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. The other hunk of our audience is people who have a fondness for black T-shirts, because that seems to be all I wear.
Yeah. Well, this is a half fashion show. I know you kind of go for that kind of dark look. I'm sporting the green today. So that's always nice. Although your fashion doesn't tend to change show to show. It's pretty much the dark black T-shirt. Is that like, if you open up your closet, Rich, and you like look inside, is it just all black shirts?
Well, not in the closet, but in the like T-shirt drawer in the there are a lot of black T-shirts in that drawer.
So do you have any colors that you actually wear? Because I'm not sure I've ever seen you wear a color.
Well, so we'll see each other next week, and we'll talk about that. But you will not actually, other than the day I arrive and the day I leave, you won't actually see all that much black. So I go to a lot of conferences. Typically, I'm usually wearing a variety of different colors. But when I'm dressed for comfort, there does tend to be a lot of black.
Nothing wrong with that. But I also know that there's going to be some tan and beige in the future. I'm going to see you in a trench coat here in Dallas. Why am I going to see you in a trench coat in Dallas next week, Rich?
Well, we're going to be in Dallas next week, hosting ChannelPro's first SMB Forum event of 2023. This is our first of 8 in-person events in 2023. The session that you're alluding to there, Matt, is one I'm going to be moderating. It is inspired by the classic TV show Unsolved Mysteries, so I will be wearing a Robert Stack style trench coat on stage. We'll see how that goes over. But the subject matter is rebuilding or building your managed service practice around cloud computing, being a cloud-first MSP as opposed to an MSP who does cloud, among many other things. We've got Kendra Lee, an amazing sales and marketing expert, is going to be there. She's going to be doing a website makeover workshop. She's going to provide some real actionable advice on turning your website into a lead generation tool. Speaking of TV shows, you're going to be hosting a TV game style show called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, in which we'll be talking about strategies for getting to $1 million, 3 million beyond, in TV game show style. Our good friend Colleen Fry, the managing editor, is going to be moderating a session about MSP automation strategies, RMM, PSA, and we're doing that sort of as a bake-off. We're going to have 3 experts on stage, and you in the audience will get to pick who had the best recipe for automation and efficiency. And I will point out that our guest host, who we'll meet in a few minutes, is, I believe, in Dallas, and I'm just letting him know now. I know a guy. I can get you in if you're interested in any of that.
So we'll talk about that here in just a second. Yeah, we've been kind of tightening up all of the pieces for the show next week, and Rich, it's turning out to be a good one. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a great show, great content. We've got a lot of great panelists, a lot of great speakers. Make sure that you're there. If you're anywhere in the Dallas area, Houston, anywhere in that neck of the woods, make it a point to be at the ChannelPro SMB Forum in Dallas. Go to events.channelpronetwork.com. You can learn more about where that event is. If you want to register, go to channelproforum.com/2023. If you're watching, I'll put a QR code up on the screen. Make sure you hit that QR code. Use promo code CP Weekly. That will get you in the door for free. But make it a point to come, because you're not going to miss it. Or if you're not in the Dallas area, check our events website again, events.channelpronetwork.com, and you'll see all the other places that we're going to be at this year. Make it a point to come to at least one, if not 2, because you're going to learn a lot. You're going to get a lot out of it, and you're going to have a good time. So Rich did allude that we have a guest from that particular neck of the woods on the show with us today. I'm very excited to have him here. He's the Vice President of Corporate Development and M&A at Meriplex, which is a managed security, managed IT, and SD-WAN solutions provider out of Houston, Texas. Prior to that, he spent 26 years as President and CEO of Preferred Technology Solutions, which is a Texas-based MSP. Please welcome Neil Medwed. Welcome, Neil.
I am so happy to be with you two today. Yeah, I'm looking forward to a great show. Yes, Dallas, Texas. I'm very sad, but I'm a huge Cowboy fan, and we kind of blew it last weekend, but I'll get over it. I'm a Cowboy fan. I have to.
Well, I am really also glad to have you on. I know we're going to have a great show. We got a lot of stuff we're going to talk about. We're going to be talking about Datto. We're going to be talking about ConnectWise. We're going to be talking a lot about M&A. We're going to be talking about Azure. MSP's roles in solving the IT skills gap. We've got a great guest interview coming up with David Jordan. He's the America's CFO at TD SYNNEX. It's going to be an awesome show, so lots of stuff to look forward to. But first, Neil, tell us a little bit more about you and a little bit more about what you do at Meriplex.
Well, sure. I'm a 39-year VAR MSP. Got into the industry in 1983, almost 40 years ago now, selling the original IBM PC and worked my way up. Again, I ran and operated Preferred Technology Solutions for 26 and a half years and sold to Meriplex about 30 months ago. And it was the best move I ever made in my life. I came over as Director of Strategic Partnerships. That kind of moved into the M&A role and became the VP of Corporate Development M&A at Meriplex. You know, I bought 10 companies. We've bought 10 companies in the last 10 years to expand the Meriplex nation, and having a blast building and growing the organization, and could not be happier.
Yeah, that is great. So you've definitely been in the industry a very long time. I want to talk to you about that, but tell me a little bit more about your acquisition by Meriplex, because I know that was fairly recently, only I think 30 months ago or so, based on our conversation. So tell us what led you to sell, basically.
Sure. My wife and I, as you know, we're not the youngest people, probably even on this call over here, but I had my company for quite a long time. I'd go to business dinners, charity dinners, sit at speakers tables many times with the leading business leaders in Dallas, Fort Worth, North Texas area, and have great conversations. And Neil, who are you? One of the president and CEO of Preferred Technology Solutions. Well, how big are you? And kind of the air would go out of the room because we weren't big enough really to be introduced to the larger companies. Owning a company for 26 and a half years, I had a great time. It was enjoyable, but it wasn't fulfilling near the end. I'd wake up in the morning, go to the office, do great things during the daytime, but I want to do something much, much bigger and better than I could. Probably 6 months before I got the call from Meriplex, actually went to an industry expert to validate what my business was worth for estate planning purposes. And I was asked, Neil, would you want to sell? It's like, well, I want to travel more and I want to, just take more time to myself. It's like, okay, travel more and take more time for yourself. And he preferred for a few years. And that's what I was going to do. But then I got a call from my best technology friend who was part of the original transaction at Meriplex after private equity bought into them. They want to expand into Dallas. And one thing led to another. 5 months later, I was part of Meriplex. And again, it was because I want to do something much bigger and better. I like to say, we're all rich in many ways at this level of our lives and stuff. But are you fulfilled? Are you truly happy? Most CEOs, there's 25% of the business that they love, and there's 75% of the business that they don't love or dislike tremendously, and that's where I was at. I love taking care of my clients. I loved working with the customers, but I didn't like the HR, the accounting, a lot of other things. And becoming Meriplex allowed me to use my superpower. What's my favorite thing to do, and get in that lane and be the best I can be. I call it, making your toes tingle. My toes weren't tingling, even though I was doing very well financially, but being able to do something much bigger than you could otherwise, being able to give more upside to your employees, be able to support your customers better. That's why I ended up selling to Meriplex. And again, best move I could have ever made.
It sounds like it's gone well. Tell us a little bit about the process and kind of, because you said it was fast, like, one thing led to another very quickly. What were some of the things that kind of happened during that process, and what have you learned on the other side of it, pro or con?
Oh, sure. First of all, always, in the back of your mind, everybody should, if you own a company, you should always have an exit strategy somewhere, in the back of your mind someplace. You should always run your company like you're going to sell in, someday, whatever that day is. And, for me, again, I was looking to sell a little bit, again, back in my mind, but it wasn't something I was really looking aggressively at. But again, the right opportunity came. A matter of fact, the 10 companies that we've bought in the last 2 years, 8 of them had no intention of selling. It was just the same thing has happened to me. I call it the art of the possible. What if we came together? It has to be great for your customers, great for your employees, has to check that box financially. But number 4, the lane. What if you can join an organization, have the power of Meriplex behind you, get in that lane, that superpower, use your superpower for the greater good? What would that look like? And again, we've had 10 and soon to be more that felt that exact same way. The outcome as part of Meriplex would be much better than it would have been doing the same thing as they were doing previously. And again, this is not just for you, the owner, but it's also for your employees, a team that got you there, as well as your customers. So, from a process standpoint, the talks started to happen, for me with the CEO, Dave Henley, who's fantastic, by the way. And it progressed, sharing the story, what we're going to build, what we're going to grow, what we're going to do. Again, that power, how are we going to take some from here to make it here, here, here? That's what really, really intrigued me. And how could I be a part of that growth, that expansion, that dream? And I didn't come in as the M&A guy. I just became the M&A guy. I was supposed to go on out to those dinners and networking events and shake the hands of these business leaders and turn them over to the sales force and then go shake more hands and things like that. But then, because of all the investment I've made in community, all the friends I have in community, all the trust that I've built up throughout the decades in community, and the passion I have for what we're building, growing, doing, I was able to call my friends and share that same message. And it became something so much bigger than I could have ever imagined, by this time. When you're talking about exiting, it's emotional. Yes, it's financial, but it's also emotional. You go from being the CEO of the company to a member of a team. And that's something that when I'm talking to other owners is something, because I've been through it and I understand the emotions of everything. I am one of them. I was one of them. And I'm good at helping them understand the process, helping them understand how to best position themselves. You ask me what I've learned. Golly, that'd take a whole nother segment, right over there. If I knew then what I know now, because I look at books, I talk to people on a daily, weekly basis, I would have run my business quite a bit different. I would have run by KPIs much, much deeper. I would have managed with my head versus my heart as much. I would have looked at financials much deeper than I did, which would have put me in a much better position whenever that opportunity arose to even do better.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Go ahead, Rich.
I just, before we move on, we'll need to do that in a moment, but I do want to take advantage of the fact, because you live in that M&A world every day, Neil, and the news is filled with talk about big tech companies laying people off. Interest rates are way up over the last 12 months. They're probably going to go up some more. all of which might imply that we're not in a robust climate for M&A activity involving MSPs. From your perspective, how does the market look today? How does that compare maybe to a year ago? And what are you kind of expecting for the rest of 2023?
Sure. When you look at MSPs, there's tens of thousands of SMB MSPs. There are well-run MSPs that are making quality profits and EBITDA. There are MSPs that you may even think, on the outside looking in, are doing well, but their EBITDA numbers are not where they should be, or could be, even more importantly. For the quality MSPs have quality revenues, quality reoccurring revenue, and have quality leadership, the M&A market is still very good. If you're a low-end producer or medium, the multiples are certainly going down. When you look at the larger organizations, there's quite a few private equity firms that have invested in the MSP marketplace. And they all want that golden goose, if you will. That larger company that has high EBITDA, that has quality leadership and multiple levels of quality leadership. So I don't want to say there's a bidding war for those types of organizations, but they're very attractive to many out there. The other thing to realize is as a company gets bigger, the lower dollar figure EBITDAs aren't as attractive to them. It doesn't move the needle as much. With interest rates going up, multiples are still strong, again, for well-round MSPs, maybe a little bit under what they were in 2022. I believe that there will be some adjustments coming up with multiples going down a little bit, but still provide strong multiples, not just maybe 2021 or 2022 multiples. But the M&A world is very robust. From the M&A side, from the private equity side, there's a lot of private equity firms that think that the MSP world's an easy place to invest your money, and it's going to bring back all these returns. What we know as MSP owners is our industry is a little bit different than other industries. And not all private equity firms are as sophisticated as they could be or need to be in our industry. And with talk about the recession coming up, it's going to put pressure on certain firms who went private equity if the returns are not where they need to be.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. And I know we're going to have a lot of M&A discussion coming up as well when we have our interview with David Jordan from TD SYNNEX. So we'll maybe kind of table that, because I think that's a good setup for how we're going to roll into that once we get there. But we do need to switch to news, because I said we got some news and some other stories to talk about. Neil, would love to get your thoughts on these and all of these. So Rich, Datto is in the news. Datto's got some new stuff. What do they got?
Yeah, we've only really got a couple of news stories this week. Neither one of them is a blockbuster, but they are interesting in different ways for portions of the audience. And so particularly for any Datto partner, but also for any Kaseya partner out there, because Datto is part of Kaseya now. Kaseya has never had networking products before, but now they do. And so this week, Datto shipped 4 new network switches. This is basically the second generation of their switch line. I won't get into the bits and bytes, but they've upgraded all the specs that you would expect them to upgrade. One thing that is interesting, in addition to rolling out these 4 new switches, they also introduced a new purchasing option for all of the products in the Datto networking line. Where in addition to the maybe traditional model where you pay an upfront fee for the hardware, you sign a service agreement, you also have the option now of putting no money down up front for the hardware and kind of rolling the expense of the hardware into the service plan subscription fees. So a true kind of as a service sort of model. So there are 2 ways to buy Datto networking gear right now, which is kind of interesting. The bigger reason I kind of put this onto the agenda for the show this week is you go back in time a year, maybe even a little bit more than a year ago, and I think there were people who were wondering about the future of the Datto networking line. This is when Datto is still just its own company, and I there was a bit of a buzz, some murmuring out among MSPs that maybe Datto wasn't really invested in those products or that product line. Is that going to be going away at some point? Then Kaseya buys Datto, and again, people are thinking, well, what does that mean for Datto networking? Kaseya said right out of the gate that one of the many things that made Datto an appealing acquisition target was that it has this networking business, which Kaseya itself has never had. And at the DattoCon event in September last year, Fred Vacola, Kaseya's CEO, said, we're going to be making quote unquote huge investments specifically in Datto's networking business. He wants to do more there. Now, the products that we're talking about right now are almost certainly in the development pipeline. Before that deal closed, the intention to do that deal was announced last April. The deal closed last June, and these switches were probably in development already, as before all that was happening. But this, if there's any lack of sincerity on Kaseya's part about their commitment to the networking business, this was certainly an opportunity to show it. And to the contrary, they not only went out and brought these new, completed the development of these products and brought them to market, but now they're kind of experimenting and innovating with the pricing or purchasing model around them. So the initial indication around Datto and Datto networking specifically is that just as we've been told, that really does have a future within Datto, and now that Datto is part of Kaseya.
Yeah, I want to, when the whole announcement came out, the Kaseya, Datto merger, there was a lot of question marks, back then. What's going to happen? How is it going to play out? Who's going to stay? Who's going to leave? Things like that. Meriplex is a large Kaseya shop and a large Datto shop. So from a Meriplex perspective, it wasn't a negative, it was a positive. From an industry perspective, again, there's a lot of questions, things like that. I believe that as time goes on, things like you're talking about here, Fred, I truly believe, is a man of his word, and that what he says, you can believe in. I believe that Kaseya is going to do really good things and continue to do good things with the Datto brand, coming out with new equipment, his commitment to the hardware side. To me, the biggest news of that, again, is the pay consumption model. Being able to, for an MSP, not to put hard cash down to preserve their cash flow and work those network products into their customer portfolio, and being able to pay for them on a consumption model way. I think that's going to be, the bigger news of the day. And I believe that taking the consumption model and weighing it internally, do I buy it outright and make more margin maybe, or conserve the cash, especially if a recession comes, if there's some kind of economic downturn, cash is oxygen. And I think that's a great move by them. I'm looking forward to seeing how it continues. I believe that people give it a fair shot, that they will end up happy as Kaseya Datto partners.
Yeah, for sure.
I think you're I think you're totally right about that consumption model and the significance of that in the story here. And as you were talking about that, it reminded me of something that was announced last September. Actually, I was at DattoCon when this got announced, that the startup networking as a service company called Nile was launched. We talked about it a little bit on the podcast around that time of year. And one of the things that was significant about Nile's model is that they allow you as an MSP to quote a price to your customers that, there is no separate purchase for the hardware. The hardware comes with the service. And that is true on an ongoing basis. So as new generations of Nile's hardware comes out, you just install that at the customer site. They don't have to pay you anymore. And this Datto announcement here feels like it sets up that opportunity for the MSP as well, to just go in and say, I'm going to sell you a secure, reliable, high-speed networking service and internet service, and the state-of-the-art hardware is included in it. You don't have to make a capital outlay, particularly in this kind of shaky economy.
It allows the MSPs who have committed themselves to the Kaseya stack, which includes Datto. It allows them to streamline their processes, streamline their organization shoulder to shoulder with a company such as Kaseya, and hopefully provide better services, better supports, more profitability for their organizations going forward.
Yeah, very good stuff. Very interesting. And Rich, I know this is more about less about the switches themselves, but they're pretty nice looking switches, I gotta say. They got lots of. I always like to see a gray box with lots and lots of Ethernet ports and SFP ports on it. It's always very, very attractive to me. We're not going to get into the bits and bytes of them, but you can go to the article at ChannelPro Network. I'll put a link to it in the show notes for episode 254. So if you're on your phone, just open the description area. You should see the links in there. If you're on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, hit the thumbs up, hit a lot of the buttons that's on there, but not the thumbs down. We don't like that button. Hit all the other buttons, but that one. We'll put a link to this article so you can go and you can read more about the switches themselves, and then you can kind of go off from there and learn a little bit more about the pricing model. But I agree, Neil. I think you hit it 100% on the head. I think the pricing model, the purchasing model there is the kind of the bigger story that is going to be really interesting to data partners, especially if they want to start getting into the networking side of that business. Rich, it's not the only story we got though. We've got an executive story. We don't talk about these kinds of things too often. Usually when we do, it's a big deal. So what's going on with or I should say over at ConnectWise?
Yeah, and from an executive news standpoint, this is kind of a big deal, actually. And we almost kind of slipped through this week without it really getting the attention that I thought it deserved. I stumbled across this news Monday night, and it was Tuesday before I could kind of follow up on it with ConnectWise, and it was Wednesday before I could actually get a story out, and the folks at Channel Futures got a story. So it was like this news had been out there for 48 hours before anybody reported about it. But Craig Fulton, who was most recently Chief Customer Officer at ConnectWise, announced at the beginning of this week that after 16 years with ConnectWise, he is stepping down from his post. He will be transitioning out of the company. He's going to be around in sort of a consulting capacity for a while during a transitional period. Hasn't announced, probably doesn't really know yet exactly what he wants to do next. He wants to open up some time in his life for his family and other interests and so on. Had nothing but great things to say about the time that he was at ConnectWise. This goes all the way back to 2007. So at the very beginning, ConnectWise, when it was founded, was an MSP in Tampa, and they developed this product to run that, the managed services business called a professional services automation tool. And eventually that became a product, and ConnectWise became both an MSP and a PSA vendor. Today they do PSA, RMM, they do everything. Basically, at some point along the way, they rebranded that MSP as Connect On to avoid the confusion between the two companies. But Craig Fulton goes all the way back to that MSP business. He was a systems engineer in 2007 when Arnie Bellini, co-founder of ConnectWise, hired him. He went on to join the vendor side of the house. He was a senior product manager, then general manager of platform. He was, when I met him already, the chief product officer. And for a number of years, anytime I went to a ConnectWise event, I had an interview with him to talk about the products and the product roadmap and so on. Since 2019, he's been chief customer officer, and in that capacity, he's been in charge of the IT Nation partner community at ConnectWise. He has for many years, in both the chief product officer role and the chief customer officer role, been a very, very familiar presence with ConnectWise partners. He is, often the master of ceremonies at an event. He gets out on the road a lot and interacts with partners all over the country. There are a lot of people who feel like they have a relationship with Craig. From my perspective as a journalist, I always kind of looked forward to my Craig Fulton interview at whatever event I was at, because I knew he would be he'd be direct. He'd give me straight answers to my questions, but also that 2-3 times in that half hour, he would make me laugh. He's just a fun person to kind of be with. But after this long and storied run, it's time for him to move on and do something else. And for me, it feels a little bit, when in early 2019, when Thoma Bravo acquired ConnectWise, Arnie Bellini stepped aside as CEO. He's still on the board. He's not like removed himself from that completely, but he stepped down as CEO at that time. This feels a little bit like another kind of significant page turning in that process, that another significant piece of that older generation, if you will, has moved on. And I just know a lot of ConnectWise partners will consider this newsworthy. I wanted to make sure we devoted a little time to it.
Craig, sure. Craig, as I became Meriplex, growing as fast as we are, I was able to spend quite a bit of time. I'm 95% of my job is M&A, and 5% of my job is working with the top management of all our vendors from the executive. Using my almost 40 years experience in community, I know most of the high-level executives. So I was blessed to be able to spend time with Craig talking about the goods, the bads, and the uglies, truthfully, throughout. You said something about Craig that is very, very true. And something I appreciate big time in my life, business or personal, is being direct. Wouldn't sugarcoat things. He'd tell you honestly the way it was. And, that's something I always appreciated about him. An organization, well, first, before I say organization, Craig, I have no doubt he's going to go on to do magnificent things. There's a time in a person's life, just like there was a time for me to go from being the CEO of Preferred Technology Solutions to being part of a dream team of individuals at Meriplex. I'm sure that's the same way he's feeling. There's a time that, you could have all the money that you need, you could have whatever it might be, but there's a time that you want to take on another challenge. And I have to believe that was the case. And if he continues his career, I have no doubt in my mind, wherever he lands, they're going to be lucky to have him.
Well, that's what I was going to ask Rich next. So usually when executives leave companies, it's not because they're retiring unless they're of certain age, but they're going somewhere else. Was there any hints where Craig is going to land?
So I'll say I first learned that he was leaving when I came across this on Reddit, come to think of it. But he posted a big, long LinkedIn a post earlier this week in which he explained the whole thing. We linked to it. So in the show notes here, we'll have a link to my story about Craig leaving. Within that, you'll find a link to the LinkedIn post if you want to see his words about that and a bunch of other topics. And he very strongly suggested doesn't have a particular destination in mind, wants to kind of figure that out. So I don't even have rumors to give you about where he might end up. But some of the other people he worked with at ConnectWise are very active in angel investing with startups that sell to MSPs and other solution providers and so on. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he kind of takes up with those folks and gets involved in some of the ventures that they're working on. But yeah, I mean, a whole range of opportunities open to the guy.
A talent like that is always going to have great options.
Yeah. And well, we will keep an eye on things and see where he lands in the coming days, months ahead, for sure. But yeah, good luck to him. Good, and wish him all of the best. Rich, that's going to be it for news for this week. But we do have some other stories that we want to talk about, and one of them is a story that's about Azure. Why don't you set this up for us?
Yeah, this is a story from the most recent issue of our magazine about Azure management. Microsoft Azure, it's this whole new beast for channel pros in a lot of ways, and a big complicated beast just in terms of all the different pieces and services and what they can do and can't do and so on. Some people find it a little intimidating. One of the things that you have to learn if you're going to get serious about building an Azure practice is managing that, because it is very similar in some ways and very different in others. And so we had a story about this topic in the last issue of the magazine. And a lot of the sources kind of emphasize both the similarities and the differences. I mean, there's no, one of the sources was quoted as saying, and I thought this was kind of helpful, there's no hardware, but a lot more flexibility. And with flexibility can come complexity if you're not kind of familiar with what you're doing, and the flexibility obviously is if your hardware server breaks, you've got to replace that piece of hardware. If a virtual machine breaks, you can spin up another one. Well, when, how, under what circumstances do you do that kind of a thing? So the overriding message there was, don't think of Azure management as being harder or easier. Just think of it as being different. So there are new skills you're going to have to acquire. There's more coding involved. I mean, this term management as code kind of comes up a lot in the article from people who we quote in there. So that's going to require some training and some skills acquisition too, to just familiarize yourself with that. You will have a wider range of options, as I was kind of alluding to before, and so you need to understand those better. If you're migrating a physical file server into Azure, do you create a SharePoint server, a straight up virtual machine? You kind of have to understand the landscape a little bit to be able to manage it more effectively. Things like backup apparently get trickier in the Azure world. Azure has a backup service, but it doesn't actually back up all of the other services. Some of the services like application services and Azure SQL have their own kind of backup tools, so you have to learn some of that stuff. There are security things that you got to understand. And then, and this is true of cloud management generally, one of the big management issues just becomes cost control and cost management, monitoring and minimizing for your customers costs. So the big picture story, and we won't get into any of the details here because I'm not a technical guy and Neil's not a technical guy, and you don't probably do a lot of Azure management, Matt, but I think the bigger picture question here that I do find interesting and worth following up on a little bit is, I don't know a ton of channel pros who are really like heavily invested in building an Azure business, but I do know some, and that part of their business is growing like gangbusters right now. I mean, there is a very compelling argument to be made for getting serious about Azure, but what goes along with that is new skills, new requirements, potentially new people. There is an investment required as well, and this article kind of surfaces some of what that entails.
Yeah, Neil, do you have any comments on Azure?
I sure do. It's from the staffing side, from the talent side. Again, I'm not technical, but I know talent very, very deeply. From a talent standpoint, I like to say what got you there isn't always going to get you to where you need to be. And from the MSP standpoint, investing in the skill sets of your technical staff is incredibly important. Many people can do 80% of an implementation correctly, but it's that 20% that's going to kick them in the butt if they don't do it right. It could be a security issue. It could be an implementation issue. It could be something in the Azure environment where you have multiple backups or multiple instances on a server, and because it's consumption based, it's going to cost you a lot more money than it should have. So really analyzing, looking your company in the mirror, if you want to, truly have an Azure practice, understand, work with your Microsoft, work with your distribution partners. What is required from a training, from a knowledge standpoint? We're in a knowledge industry, and in the MSP world, especially a smaller MSP world, you try to be as lean and mean as possible, and taking your engineering force, your technical resources out of the field into training can be an extremely difficult thing to do, but it's something that must be done. You need to understand, if you want to build an Azure practice, what it's going to require, what talent levels, do you have the right talent levels? If you don't have the right talent levels, you need to acquire the right talent, or you need to train up your people. You know, I would strongly say, after looking in a mirror, if you realize you don't have the right talent that can do 100% of the installation correctly, not 80%, that you drive a plan in order to create those internal professionals.
Interesting points. Rich?
Well, this is actually a perfect segue to the other story in here that we wanted to talk about a little bit. So let's just go ahead and move on to that, because there is, and this is, this went up this morning, I think, or last night. This is the newest story you will find as of right now on ChannelProNetwork.com. It's a contributed piece by an executive at SAP. The title is "The MSP's Role in Solving the IT Skills Gap." And he's kind of talking about the skills gap at an end user organization, an end user large enough to have an IT department, and the challenges they're running into in terms of finding and acquiring and retaining talent, which are problems that are very familiar to MSPs as well. And so he was kind of saying that, you can kind of come in there and help relieve some of that pressure if you're investing in areas like cloud, that maybe require a little bit less hands-on assistance, and you can provide outsourced assistance there. That's one way for you to be helpful. You can be helpful in terms of training the existing staff that these companies have. You can, some companies anyway can actually develop IP that will maybe help their end user customers automate processes and get by with fewer people. But I really wanted to kind of bring this into the conversation for this show, because as the owner of a smaller MSP once upon a time, who is now a key executive at a much larger MSP, Neil, you've got a wide range of experience with the IT skills gap. And I'm just sort of curious about your thoughts. I mean, either in terms of how an MSP can help their customers negotiate the skills gap, but also just what it's like right now, what MSPs out there need to be thinking about right now in terms of addressing their own IT skills gap.
Sure. First and foremost, when every MSP out there, there's not an MSP that's not going to say that they have a great technical force, they have a great security team, all these, different scenarios. And at Preferred Technology Solutions, we had great people, we had great talent. And again, we said those same things. We have, we're great at this and great in that, but there's different levels of great, I guess, is the best way, that I can put it. At Meriplex, being a much larger organization, I call it the dream team of talent that we have. And as importantly as the talent side, the sophistication we have internally. When you're a mid-sized company and you want to outsource a component of your IT to a partner, it's not as much about, let's go to the bar, they take you to dinner and the relationship side. It's about SLAs, contracts. Are you living up to the contracts, KPIs? So you need sophistication. VAR Staffing is a company that staffs for MSPs, throughout the nation. And we all know that finding staff is the most difficult, finding quality staff is the most difficult thing that we can do as an MSP. Someone has the soft skills as well as the hard skills. I was at a conference, came back last night from a conference, and there was a lady, keynote speaker, I forgot her name, but she said you can be good to all or be spectacular to a few. And what she was talking about was you can find your niche and be the best that you can be at that niche, and you'll go much farther than being, specialist versus generalist is a good way to put it. Back to the training from the Azure side. No company is wonderful at everything. They have strengths, they have weaknesses. You need to understand your strengths and where you want to go to market. You need to understand your weaknesses and make a determination. Do you want to strengthen those weaknesses or invest time, efforts, energy into strengthening other areas, whether it be strengths you already have to be the best of the best of the best, or to strengthen a core need such as Azure, like we're talking about over here. So talent, where and how do you find, talent nowadays? There's a lot of tech layoffs, as we all hear. You get the news from the Googles and Microsofts, all the different companies, and that's, certainly an avenue. But again, looking at your company objectively, understanding where your strengths are, being able to say, yes, I can do that to the customer and actually do what you say you're going to do is going to be the telling tale of success. Whether you're an end user, small, medium, or large, we all fight that same charge. At Meriplex, we're all looking for quality talent. At Meriplex, we're lucky that we provide upside, to the engineering talent. We're growing so fast organically, forget the M&A, that there's areas they can move up the stack. They can go from engineer level 1 to 2 to 3. They can go into management. Smaller MSPs don't have that. There's a ceiling where a talent, can go. When the end user calls that employee and says, come to work for me, there's nothing worse than getting that knock on the door at 7:45 in the morning from one of your employees back in the preferred days. Hey, I have a great opportunity. And they tell you the opportunity and it's best for their family. So you got to shake their hand, say, I'm happy for you. I can't tell you not to take it. But luckily, with larger organizations like Meriplex, we can have that dream team talent that has great upside. And if, pay the market rates, if you will, for them. But, it's an ecosystem that the especially larger companies, they need to be able to outsource to competent, sophisticated MSPs, as well as do smaller companies. And that's, again, where, Meriplex fits in. I'm lucky. The staff that I had at Preferred was great people, but I couldn't afford to hire half the people we have at Meriplex. That's a fact.
Yeah, interesting. Rich, I saw one line in here that I thought was interesting. It was kind of up towards the very beginning, but it was some Gartner research that shows that current skills in IT are becoming obsolete, which is kind of interesting because the IT industry, I have to imagine, has a history of rapid change, right? You've always got to be, anybody who's involved in tech is always kind of having to be learning new things. But I found that line interesting because it's one of the first times I've really thought about technology skills traditionally had always built on themselves. Like, sure, you have to learn a new version of Windows, or you have to, you have new versions of servers, and you have new types of servers, and but the knowledge base would still kind of grow with you, even though you have to change along with the technology. But this is one of the first times I've really thought about, wow, there is ways of doing technology that really are obsolete now. And that's an interesting, what can companies do to retrain the employees that they have, so that way they can come on the other side of that? And what are some of the things that are becoming obsolete?
Your PBX.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So Neil, what do you do with your employees? How do you get them ready?
Well, number one is you have to understand what the waves, by reading your magazine, by going to your website, by understanding what's coming, investing the time, efforts, energies to understand what the next waves are, becoming part of technology communities, where you can be in front of. There's so many MSPs that truly don't, they don't go to conferences. They may go 1 or 2 per year. Type of thing. They don't read the industry magazines. They don't keep up with the technology because they're running so fast, they're trying to keep their head above water, type of thing. But number one is understanding the waves, what's coming, and where the investments need to be made. Number two is, once you understand where you need to be, is develop that action plan. That action plan, can be working with your favorite distributors, who may have the training, working with your key manufacturers who could provide that training. For most technologies, there is a plethora of information and training capability out there. Some maybe have to be paid for, classes, things like that. Some may be able to be subsidized by distribution by the manufacturers themselves, but for the most part, they're available. The biggest thing is for the leaders of the organizations to invest in your employees. Many of them, I hate to say it this fashion, not many of them, some of them, there's to be a subset that are afraid to train their employees too much. Because guess what? They're going to go to another opportunity. They're going to ask for raises. But you need that. You have to understand that your company is either going to go extinct. If you're still just a VAR nowadays, you're probably not positioned for the future. If you're an MSP, MSSP, you're much better positioned for the future. Cloud, we talked about cloud. If you don't have quality knowledge of Azure, even AWS, Google, nowadays, that's gonna become an issue. So again, identifying what the future is going to bring. Once identified, understanding what it's going to take to get your talent level here, to up here, then executing and providing incentive for those people to train. It's your lifeblood. We're in a knowledge business. If you don't have knowledge, the right knowledge, you're not going to be able to succeed long term.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you tied it back to the Azure story, because it really rolls into that. There's so many smaller MSPs, even maybe mid-sized MSPs that are just kind of avoiding the whole public cloud thing. And like, you eventually you got to dive in and you got to make investments either in personnel or in yourself or in whatever to learn and look at the way the models are changing and the way consumption's changing and how you can price and how you can sell and all that stuff. So it's really, really interesting that you tied it back to that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Rich, anything else to touch on this story? I know we're running a little long and we got to move on because we've got our interview guest waiting in the wings. What, anything else to say here?
Well, let's not keep our interview guest waiting. It's time to chat him up.
All right, with that, we'll put a link to the story for the Azure story and the story. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. There's lots and lots of stuff in there that we didn't talk about or get to. So go and check those out. I'm sure you'll find them worthwhile. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Neil will be with us on the other side. We're going to also be joined by David Jordan, America's CFO of TD SYNNEX. We're going to be talking about M&A options. You're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be a great interview. Stick around. We will be right back. And welcome back to part 2 of this episode of ChannelPro Weekly. We got an amazing guest interview lined up for you today. I'm really excited to talk about it because we've been talking about mergers and acquisitions on the show a lot lately, especially over the last two years or so, where it's been a very, very hot market. And that mergers and acquisition market shows no signs of slowing down in 2023, particularly when it comes to private equity. Now, here to discuss underappreciated M&A options and more is David Jordan, America's CFO at TD SYNNEX. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great having you on the show. But before we dive too deep into that, though, I'd love to give you a chance to tell us a little bit more about you and a little bit more about what you do at TD SYNNEX.
So I'm the America's CFO at TD SYNNEX. I've kind of bounced around. I've been here almost 10 years, and so I've worked in the region. I've worked at headquarters. But one thing's always been consistent. I've been part of all the M&A work that we've done. And then, I guess it was probably 6 months ago, we put together a playbook for our resellers to say, hey, let me tell you the tips and tricks that we found helpful along the way, which has been a really interesting journey. But currently, I'm responsible for the Americas region financially. So everything from credit to, FP&A, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy to be here.
So I mean, TD SYNNEX has a big M&A story as well. Were you from the tech data side, or are you from the SYNNEX side when all of that happened?
So I'm originally from the tech data side. Actually, fun fact, Tech Data was my client 10 years ago. I joined the firm. We were 20 billion, I think, in revenue. Fast forward almost 9 years now, we're going over 60. And a good chunk of that is through M&A. So it's been a heck of a ride.
So that's interesting. So how was Tech Data your client? How did you wind up then becoming part of Tech Data?
So I worked for Ernst & Young, and I was an auditor. That's where I first cut my teeth in public accounting. and I was on the public audit of Tech Data at the time. And then I joined the finance organization after a couple of years, and then kind of rode from there.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. And so how are things at TD SYNNEX post your big merger? Everything smooth there? What's that been like?
You know, it's been a fun story. So we brought these two companies together, and I remember when we started, we all got in a room, and you're competitors, right? And it's, hey, we got an idea. What if we put these two behemoths together? And in the beginning, it's like, well, you know, I don't know. But when you started to look at the boxes and you looked at the capabilities of the two companies, we checked every box for each other. And so it's like SYNNEX wanted to go into Western Europe. We were huge. We needed Japan, but had Southeast Asia. Check, check. We were good in the data center. They were good in security. And so when we put these two businesses together, we said, we might be a little crazy, but if we literally spread our capabilities side by side and take the best of both, there's nothing that can beat it. And so once everybody figured out the story, we closed that thing in 90 days.
Wow, what an interesting and
We
fascinating
signed
story.
the deal in 90 days, I should say. Sorry.
Yeah, that is a really interesting and fascinating story. How all of that kind of came together, and it illustrates, you know, again, that the M&A market is incredibly active, and lots of companies are coming together. So I should also ask, just because there may be that one listener or viewer out there that has no idea who TD SYNNEX is, perhaps it might be a good idea for you to just give us a quick rundown of that company.
Sure. So TD SYNNEX is the largest global IT distributor in the world. We cover everything from consumer electronics to the most complex technology in the data center. Our job, we're a B2B business. We operate through resellers. So our job is kind of to support large IT OEMs to sell product through resellers to end users. And so, you know, our role is to enable the channel and help resellers be successful, and we take that seriously. And we're in about 140 countries around the world, 60 billion in revenue. Not that stats matter, but we're large in every way.
You know, I'll just observe, you know, a company's books are clean and healthy if the guy who audits them takes a job there afterwards. So 2 thumbs up for Tech Data back when you joined the company. David, you're on the show for a pretty specific reason. I attended the Community Solve, the TD SYNNEX Community Solve conference in Orlando back in November. And one morning you were on stage there giving a presentation in which you talked about, and you used the word playbook just a while ago. You were specifically talking about how, you know, given the sophisticated financial relationships a company like TD SYNNEX has, you guys are familiar with the plays that a private equity organization will run when they're going out and acquiring an MSP or another tech business. And you said one of the things that a TD SYNNEX partner can do is talk to us about that. Like, we can kind of teach you their plays. You may be able to grow your business without actually having to sell to a private equity firm if you kind of understand what the plays in the playbook are. So I really want to kind of get into that because it's such a fascinating idea to me. But I guess I'll just take a step back to kick us off a little bit. What are the pros and cons for an MSP based on your experience of when they're ready to sell? What are the pros and cons of selling to a private equity firm?
So I think the pro is you have access to a professional and a network of people through the private equity fund that can help you create value in your business. I mean, these funds are incredibly sophisticated. The larger they are, the more domain expertise they have, and they allow you access to all of that. You can also compare notes across the portfolio companies to look at different ways to create value, CEO to CEO, so on and so forth. The downside is really simple. You're partnering with a financial investor. They expect a return. Had you done the work yourself, you would keep more of the upside. And so that's always the pro and con that people have to weigh. You know, are you capable of doing it yourself? Can you build a deal thesis that can create value? If you can and you do it all by yourself, you will actually make a lot more money. On the flip side, if you have no clue, partnering with them can create a lot of value, right? Because they'll guide you along the way.
And so what are some of the plays for that person who's you know, maybe above the no clue kind of level, but wondering, can I run some of the plays that a private equity firm might run with my company and, you know, keep that value myself, keep it inside the company? What kinds of things do you see private equity firms do that are replicable by a sufficiently sophisticated partner?
So the first is they get ready to sell, right? There is no question. They prepare years in advance. There's a story for the next owner, how they're going to monetize the investment, and thus why you should pay extra today, right? So it's a very thought out process. But they also look at a variety of traditional levers. The first is financial engineering, right? If you can exclude anything from EBITDA and then multiply that to create the value of the company, exclusions create value, and you've effectively done nothing. And so they're maniacally focused on backing out one-time costs and things like that. But they also look at traditional things like productivity, pricing, et cetera, et cetera. These teams, they use consultants to some degree, will do deep studies on these businesses, trying to figure out where is the value unlocked, right? For example, how much back office as a percentage of total cost do you have? Is that optimal? What is the cost of your sales organization? Are they focused in the right areas? Can you remove spans and layers to drive cost savings? They'll look at that. They'll also flip and look at pricing. They want to understand, how are you pricing deals to the street? Are you at market? Are you below market? Are there levers that we can turn that would drop more money to the bottom line? And they will turn every lever they can. But it's very, I'll call it data-driven, scientific, and there's a lot of emphasis behind it. And a lot of companies have just never thought to do that. The other thing that they do incredibly well is they reward management. And so in a typical private equity transaction, management will get 5 to 10% of the deal value. And the reason is because they want you bought in from the beginning. And so they'll come in with a deal thesis. Here's what we think we can accomplish. But if you meet or beat their expectations, you get an unfair share of the upside. And that's beneficial, right? Because if you can take the top 10% of a management team and say, hey, look, if we knock this out of the park, you're going to make 5 times what you used to. Everybody's head's in the game real quick. And so they're very good at that, completely aligning company value to management compensation. And then they run all the, obviously, the traditional plays.
I'd like to add something else to I agree 100% in everything that you're saying. The inception of a VAR MSP, it's normally a salesperson that said, hey, I can do it better, or a engineer that said, hey, I can do it better, and let's open up our own MSP. Rarely, if any, is it a sophisticated financial person that opened up the MSP and said, hey, let's open up an MSP. So, from the drive or from the purpose standpoint, I look at deals all the time. I talk to people, talk to owners on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And the sophistication, I wish everybody had the great sophistication in their MSP. If they did, all these MSPs would be running at high EBITDA and, running a really, really tight ship. But the reality of the matter is very few are that top-notch financial expertise type of organization. Going with private equity money is certainly a really, really good option for some. The PE is looking for platform companies that they can invest in and take a company from here to here to here, hopefully with that right management. It's a different level executive sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they can take a business from here to here versus taking it from here to here and really scale it, even with the private equity lens to look through, if you will. So you really need to look at purpose. What's the driver behind someone wanting to sell their MSP? It could be they want to take the pressure off of them. They have money, they want to secure themselves financially and go that next phase of their life, that next chapter of their life. It could be like, for me, do something much, much bigger and better than I could my own. So really looking at, what's driving that person is, to me, the starting point in any transaction. Foundation, platform. There's a lot of smart private equity money that's come into the marketplace, and there's a lot not so smart. I think that you'll probably agree with that. M&A as the driving force for expansion without strong organic growth is a house of cards. that is going to fall in. And it's not as easy as some financial whiz kids think it is running a private equity firm getting into the MSP world. And that's going to be a real telling sign next, let's say, 12 to 36 months of seeing some of these companies who came in and said, hey, you can be a platform, without really the basis and knowledge of that CEO being able to truly drive, build, and scale. It's going to be interesting because, again, they want their 30% returns per year, stuff like that. So it's going to be an interesting world. But again, we're talking the world of M&A. I truly believe you got to start at the purpose and desire. What is that CEO trying to achieve? Can they do it themselves? Can they do it with private equity money? Or is it better to combine forces to achieve all the goals?
I think that's a spot on point. And to one of the points you made was around the sophistication of some of the PE guys. I'll give you an example. You can have two MSPs. Well, first, they really pressure test the definition of an MSP, right? If you're in the data center leasing business, you're a product reseller, right? They're not going to fall for that, right? They want true consumption, et cetera, et cetera. But these guys know that if you sell a data center on a lease to a customer and you put an 8% interest rate on it and they pay you every month, that isn't an MSP, right? That's a lease. On the flip side, if you build your own data center and then you sign a 3-year deal with them to pay you on a monthly basis for compute and storage, that is an MSP. Because of the financial characteristics of that data center consumption model and the commitment that comes along with it, the value of that enterprise is 2x the product business. And they know that. And so they'll work with folks like Neil and others to separate these businesses and really drive the focus into what is going to pay a double-digit EBITDA multiple. That's where they create value. And to Neil's point, which couldn't be more accurate, a lot of folks that start these businesses, they're engineers by trade, they're entrepreneurs. They don't understand all this, I'll call business school junk, right? So when you partner them up, it can be powerful, right? But that's not to say you can't teach the engineer to do it themselves, right? You can do both.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I wanted to go next is because to Neil's point, probably most of the people listening to or watching the show right now, don't have that level of sophistication. They don't, they're not deep in the business school junk that could actually help them grow their business. And so one way to get access to that kind of sophistication is to become part of a private equity firm or a larger acquiring MSP. Are there other ways, though, without selling the business, can you consult with, are there other ways basically to leverage the expertise of someone who does know what a private equity firm would otherwise do?
There absolutely is. So right out of the gate, if you get bought by private equity, if you don't have a strong CFO, they're going to get you one, right? Because the first thing they're going to want to do is segment that business, understand the economics, et cetera, et cetera. Any business can go hire a good CFO. Now, if you don't know what a good CFO is, you got to start leveraging your network, because there's two types, and I tell people this all the time. There's finance people and there's accountants. And you need both, but a good CFO is finance. They're looking forward, they're understanding economics. They don't care whether the reserve was high or low, right? That's what accountants deal with. But then fast forward, a lot of these PE funds, they use a ton of experts and consultants to figure out all of the pieces that we described. And so as an owner operator, get you a good CFO to maintain day to day and help map out the plan. But then where you don't have specific expertise, whether it's how you change your capital structure, how you decide strategically what verticals to go in if there's a lot of options in the market, you can hire boutique consulting firms and other experts from other companies to come in and help you. One of the most common things that the PE guys will do is they'll go hire a former executive from pick your favorite large enterprise. They'll parachute them in for $500 or $1,000 an hour to help the management team fix something, build something, create something, and then they're gone. And the value that that individual can create in a very short window is well worth the money if you get the right person. And so that's kind of how it happens. And then through time, as you work with these different third parties, you're inherently building the capability in the management team. And so as they move forward, they begin to replicate the model, the thought, the process themselves.
Yeah, I want to add, one more thing to that comment. I'm a 39-year VAR MSP. I had my own company, 26 and a half years, before I sold to Meriplex. Decision-making process. Me coming from a smaller MSP to arguably the fastest growing MSP in the nation, I've learned more in the last 29, 30 months than I did for decades before. That's being in peer groups and all these different things. The decision-making processes that smaller MSPs normally go with, and this is paraphrasing, and this is an extreme example. You go to a TD SYNNEX conference and you meet some great partners, some great vendors. You come back and you say, okay, team, we're going to change from this to this, pick the vendor slot over here. And you don't always think it through as deeply as you really need to from the financial aspect of it. When you change a vendor, sales are involved, operations are involved, technical is involved, finance is involved, all these different components. But at Meriplex, we're much more sophisticated. You have all these different sign-offs before a vendor decision is made. When you're in a large organization, decisions are very thoughtful, extremely thoughtful. All these checks and balances are in place to make sure that you're going to make the right decision. That doesn't mean every decision is right, but you're going to minimize your chances of making an incorrect decision. And that is something that's very, very powerful and a very, very big learning experience that I've had as being a part of the great team at Meriplex.
That's a very good point. Very good point. And, just to expand on that, I remember when we started working, we actually sold our business to private equity, and you began to look at the content they wanted to make a decision. It stepped our game up big time. I remember looking at some of the financial models, thinking what we brought to the table was pretty good. And they're like, let me show you this one. And you're like, boom, right? Mind's blown. But, like Neil said, once you learn that, it's game time, man.
Due diligence. I like to say that, going through a due diligence process, I'm a bald guy, so it's funny me saying this, but they know how many hairs you have on your head.
Yeah.
When you go through the complete, due diligence process. And they're going to analyze every component for your business, quality of earnings to customers, to vendors, to pricing, to all these different things, and understand your business. I bet you 9 times out of 10, much deeper than you even understand your business. And back to your point, bringing in the right expertise, paying that $500 to $1,000 an hour for that, that quality expert that can come and spend a day with you, really analyze the business and bring professional knowledge back. There's a difference between a $500 to $1,000, for the most part, expert that's going to come on in with his track record of successes versus this $200 an hour person that's, one's $200 an hour, one's $1,000 an hour. But in most cases, that $1,000 an hour with that great track record will bring back such better returns for you, not just in the long run, but in the short run. I'm a huge advocate of bringing in the expertise, knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and bringing in the right people around you to enhance your company, enhance your business.
Completely agree. I couldn't have said it better myself.
David, one of the other things you spoke about at the conference last year, most people probably think about private equity or private equity firms as someplace, they might or might not want to sell to. But you said, and this was not information I had heard about before, a lot of the private equity firms have a credit arm of some kind of credit operation. And this could potentially be a different way of working with a PE firm. Rather than sell your business to them, there may be a credit or a borrowing opportunity there that could be beneficial. So talk a little bit about, what those credit arms do, and how potentially people in the audience here might leverage that opportunity.
Sure. So, and let me back up for a second. So if you sell your business to private equity, and let's say you sell it for 7 times earnings, they will typically borrow 4 to 5 times earnings at a minimum from a bank, and then they'll fund 2 times, in cash. And so what I share with a lot of our resellers is, 75, 60, 70% of the deal, they're just borrowing from a bank, right? So if you only want to raise 50, 60, 70%, there's a variety of outlets that you can do that. And so a couple of examples I've given, you can go to a traditional bank. Typically, they'll loan you 3 to 4 times EBITDA. These are the Wells Fargos and others of the world, right? Then you get into what I call high yield lending, alternative finance, et cetera. And so that's where you're starting to borrow 4, 5, 6, 7 times earnings. And there's a variety of sources there that do it as well, including private equities. So if you look at some of the largest PE shops in the world, many of them are public, they have a alternative credit group. All they do is loan money for a living, and they will take a lot more risk than a traditional bank, but they charge a lot more interest. And so in today's environment, you're borrowing from a bank for probably 9 or 10% interest, depending on your size. When you start going and getting money from them, you're in the 12 to 15% interest. And so you're going to pay a little bit more. But what I shared with our resellers was, but think about it. If you're trying to deliver 20, 30, 40% returns on your money, who cares if you're paying 15, right? And so the difference is, if you sell to PE, they're going after the 20, 30, 40% returns, and they don't care that they paid 15. You could pay 15, drive the return, and keep the spread. And so that's the game. And that's why, being a little more sophisticated from a financial perspective, understanding how to set up your capital structure and leverage different pools of cash can help you maximize kind of return on your investment. Does that make sense?
And one thing to add to that, and I totally agree with where you're coming from and what you're saying there, that's certainly an avenue for some MSPs to go to the alternative financing, do it themselves versus partner up with a PE firm. When you look at the MSP landscape, there's tens of thousands of SMB MSPs. Most private equity is looking, I'd say, for a couple $1 million of EBITDA and up. If you're a $500,000 EBITDA, $700,000, even $1 million of EBITDA, private equity for the most part isn't going to have much interest in you. And because there's tens of thousands of SMB MSPs out there, a lot of the audience here, one day they hope to build and grow to where they'd be attractive in that sense to private equity. And again, if they're not, they do have banking relationships. They do potentially have alternative financing through a PE firm or, different types of avenues, if you will, over there. The sophistication of an MSP, again, how do you get from A to B to C? How do you get from that $750,000 EBITDA to $1 million EBITDA to 1.5 to 2 million, where you're really attractive in there? That could be a whole different segment. If I knew then what I know now, how much different I would have run, my company in my 26 and a half years. Banking finance is a good way. Another option for many is 1 + 1 = more than 2. Two MSPs coming together to try to get to where you'd be attractive in those worlds, get the EBITDA numbers up enough to be, whether it's attractive to a Meriplex type of company or private equity to use as a platform organization. There are so many different ways to grow. But again, for me, taking a look in the mirror at your business, figuring out how you can be the best run company, use the experts that you can hire or partner with, is a great way to get you to the point where they could be talking in those languages with the private equity firms.
Those are really good points. One thing I wanted to add, though, is private equity does tend to use a lot of leverage, but people have to realize that when you start borrowing 4, 5, 6 times the earnings of a company, you're in a high risk situation. Think about your own personal life. What if you borrowed 4 times your income for your mortgage, right? Like, think about the pressure that that would put on. That same pressure exists in a company. Now, the only difference is you can run it to zero technically. I share that because the level of financial sophistication that has to go into a company when you're borrowing at those levels is high. And the PE funds will do backstop research against history to prove at certain levels of debt how much excess liquidity is there on a business. Because the one thing, unfortunately, I've seen happen before is people take on a lot of leverage, they do a lot of M&A, they overpay, and then boom, the whole business runs out of cash. And as Neil said, it's hard to borrow money when you're small. When you got a problem, it's real hard. And so just being very thoughtful about where you set the capital structure, how much room you have, what options do you have should there be a downturn, et cetera, is super, super important. And I wanted to make one other comment because Neil kind of hinted at this, and I'd be curious for your opinion here too. Talked about putting 2 companies together. And we get this question all the time. How come private equity just buys 2 things and puts them together? What happens? And Neil started, and I think you would agree that if you take 2 like-sized businesses and you put them together, and let's say they're $1 million in EBITDA piece, right? And it's a, I don't know, $20 million MSP making $1 million, whatever. And you put them together. Let's say you don't change the earnings. Just doubling the size of that business increases the value, right? Because it's less risk, it's got more capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why you see a lot of consolidation in our space, is because just by making a company larger, all things equal, and you got to make it work, you are actually increasing the enterprise value. And so every investment thesis in the MSP world is all about growing inorganically. Now, you have to prove you can grow organically too to drive the multiple, but at the same time, there is a ton of value that gets created by adding small companies together.
Go ahead, Neil.
I was just going to say, I certainly agree with that. There's, to me, and you're the financial whiz kid. You've probably forgotten more than I know in some ways on some subjects and stuff. But there's no such thing really as a merger of equals, I believe. You may say something different, but someone's always buying someone. And synergizing 2 organizations is one of the most difficult things that someone can ever do. You have the human aspect, you have the financial aspect, you have the operational and the technical sides and all these things. And it can certainly drive value, but also the risk associated, unless you have a extremely strong leadership, that can wave the flag and be that leader in that organization, also comes with a lot of risk of 2 cultures not coming together as effectively as they thought they would.
I completely agree.
And I mean, you were kind of leading us maybe to the next thing I kind of wanted to get into a little bit here, which is just that we kick things off by talking about the pros and cons of selling to private equity. We should probably talk about, the pros and cons of a merger, whether that's with a like-sized company, a much larger company, and just how those 2 strategies compare. I'll start with you, David, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Neil.
So I think Neil nailed it. There is no such thing as a merger. Somebody takes control at the top, and then group by group, function by function, there's a control point based on the design of the org. But where he started was absolutely right. You can create a lot of value through a merger, but you have to have people who are experts at putting companies together, right? And you also have to be proactive at identifying people who may not want to create the best of both and get them out of there, right? Because anytime you bring 2 organizations together, you're going to have 2 things done completely different, right? Both are right in a lot of cases, but it's got to change, and somebody's got to take that organization through that and create the culture that you want. Because what unfortunately happens in a lot of M&A that fails is they don't address culture, they don't address working norms, they don't address leadership problems, and then you end up with the worst of everything. Because what happens is whoever's the loudest in the room, whoever's the most disruptive, typically people will just cave and say, whatever, we'll just do it that way. And you end up worse off. And then all of a sudden the financials stop performing, et cetera, et cetera. The other piece I would highlight is in every deal thesis, you put two companies together, you have to drive synergies or savings. And you have to be very careful. And, I can't comment publicly on what we did, but what I would tell you in general is you can go after support functions in the back office pretty aggressively if you want. Be very careful in the commercial space, especially for resellers, distributors, etc., because this business is built off relationships. And, I tell our sales organization all the time, I mean, they are so valuable to me because our customers buy because we have a lot of product and we have a lot of capabilities. We have a lot of great sales folks that make those deals happen. And so you do not want to change the mood of the mob. And so being very thoughtful about making sure that your team is part of the journey, committed to the success, understands how they play in the bigger picture is super, super important.
Yeah, I'd add one more thing to that. Meriplex, when they bought my company, Preferred Technology Solutions, 29, 30 months ago, we're a total, even with my company, about 80 people. And we're based in Houston, corporate offices in Houston. They want to expand into Dallas, and that's when I got the call. And one thing led to another. I became part of Meriplex. Today we're sitting about 575 people and in 12 cities instead of just 2 cities. I brought in 10 companies in the last 2 years to become part of the Meriplex nation. And when you're looking at synergies, when you're looking at organizations, many private equity backed companies, when they're buying another company to bring them into the fold, in their spreadsheets in the sky, what happens is, you like that, spreadsheets in the sky. What happens is that they're going to look at synergizing 10, 20% of the employee base. Yeah, they're going to lose a certain number of clients because of that. And that is one way of paying debt much quicker, if you will. They'd have their financial modeling. If I do this, what's going to bring me the best return, the lowest risk, the quickest repayments in that sense. At Meriplex, for example, we synergize very, very little because we're growing so fast organically. Organic growth is 25, 30% per year. Forget about the M&A side of it. We need every person. So when you look at numbers I've heard, average employee loss and customer loss is about 11% in year one. So 11% of the customers on average after an acquisition is going to leave the acquired company. With Meriplex, we're about half that, which is, my understanding, industry leading, right over there, because we take very, very good care. We rarely synergize the employee base. So Joe, who used to answer the phone, is still Joe answering the phone afterwards. And we have a strong focus on existing customers and customer complete satisfaction. Understanding what a PE firm is, what they intend to do, how their track record is one of the most important pieces of advice, things I've learned understanding the M&A marketplace in the IT field, sitting on panels, taking my time to truly understand who my competitors are, understanding how they're going to synergize, what their intentions are, what their end game is. It's funny, I say this to them, you guys are trying to build up so Meriplex will buy you one day. In some ways, that's how I, kind of look at certain things. But understanding the company that you're going to partner with, understanding their track record, how they're going to do things, making sure it's great for your customers, making sure it's great for your employees. Before it has to check the financial mark for you, make sure it's great for your customers, great for your employees, and then make sure, obviously, it's going to be good financially for you, and then also put you in that perfect role going forward, that perfect lane, so you can use your superpower to be the best you can be.
I think that's a good point. And that is a very common misconception that all private equity is the same. I tell people to ask the question to the firm, are you an owner or an operator? And if you can transparently get that answer, it is super helpful, because there are two types, and I'm not going to name who's who, so please don't ask, but there are firms that believe they buy right, they work hand in hand with management to create plans that drive value, and they allow management the autonomy to run their own business. We call them owners. Then there's operators. They're all friendly during due diligence, and then you close. And then boom, here comes the parachute team of 15 people they've hired to run your company, and you're pushed out of the way. You have to be careful. If you're looking for that kind of support, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. If you are not looking for that kind of support, you are in for a rough ride. And typically when you sell to private equity, you'll own about 5 to 10% of it, right? Because you're not going to get all your money up front. And so having to deal with that can be very difficult. And so I always tell people, ask the question, are they owners or operators? And then ask yourself, which one are you looking for?
David, that's a magnificent point. Story, Dave Henley, our CEO, in my 39 years in this industry, he's easily a top 5 talent of anybody I've ever met. I've learned more from him. It's amazing. When he went for his first round of private equity, 4 years ago, he talked to all the big ones out there, that everybody probably knows the name of. And the very, very important question that he asked is, how much of your own money, everybody that works in your fund, how much of your own money is in the fund? Oh, we got $20 million in the fund. Well, you're a $1.3 billion private equity firm. You only have $20 million of your own money. It's all other people's money. And then we're lucky enough to partner with Clairvest at 36% of their money in their fund. And that's a whole different scenario. Everybody's on the right side of the table in that sense. So understand, again, I've learned more in the last 30 months on private equity and M&A than I had in my whole career. Understand who you're partnered with. Are they an owner or are they an operator? What's the life? I call T-Day is transaction day. Yeah. T- is leading up to the transaction. Transactions T-Day. T+ is post-transaction. Fully understand what your world's going to be at T-Day and T+, because if you expect one thing and all of a sudden they parachute down with all their people, you're not going to have a very big smile on your face, and more likely, neither are your employees.
Yep, completely agree.
So, David, I think we have time for one more question, and I want to touch back to something that Neil said, and it's something I think a lot of smaller MSPs who might be thinking about private equity or thinking about M&A to grow, or might even be at the point where they think they're big enough. How do you attract private equity? Like what? Because as Neil said, you need to be a certain size, you need to have certain factors. What are those factors? And then, like, do you just make a phone call and say, "Hey, private equity, I want to be sold." Parachute in. We're talking a lot about parachuting today, so I guess you have to have a big field by your company so people have a spot to aim and land. But like, how do you get on their radar?
So, and I probably don't have a perfect answer for this, but what I will tell you is there is a high correlation between like the Inc. 500 list, the MSP 500 list, et cetera, et cetera. Those are go-to lists for every company looking to acquire, right? Because there's not an easy source to find every available company, even ones that you just want to compete with. And so getting on those lists will absolutely get you a phone call. What I would tell you is if you're a small to medium MSP, you're likely going to partner up with a small to medium private equity shop. And typically these funds are run by folks, there's 5 or 10 people, that's it. And so I've told a number of folks, hit them up on LinkedIn. I mean, that's all they do is search for transactions. If they have an owner that says, hey, I'm looking to get out, would love to sell you the business, I'm happy to stay on and run it for you for a period of time, they will have those dialogues, reach out. But what I would share with the person who is going to do that is prepare in advance. Because what you don't want to do is say, I had a thought, I think I'm going to sell this thing. Let me call this PE fund, right? They're going to get you for everything they've got, right? Because you're very unprepared. However, if you start building that story now, you have a compelling thesis that they can use in their investment committee, they're going to be willing to pay for that. And so do the work up front.
Neil, I'll give you the last word. Yeah, go ahead, Neil. I'll give you the last word.
Sure. As a MSP, you get emails, calls, reach outs on a daily, weekly basis. The number of reach outs that you get as an owner of an MSP is it's XXX. You don't want to hear them, you don't want to listen to them. Building relationships is truly the key. I believed in LinkedIn. If your financials and your business is ready, and anybody that opens up a company should have some kind of exit strategy, and every business should be as sophisticated as possible on their financial side, so whenever that time comes, that they're able to have quality information to provide to a Meriplex, to a private equity firm, whatever it may be. But there, first of all, invest in community. Number one, invest in community, whether it be a TD SYNNEX community or a peer group of some kind. Invest in community, be present in those places, because you'll run into, there's probably 10 or 20 companies similar to Meriplex. We have the best story of everybody. I'll say that to any of the competitors. But we are at the conferences. We are actively looking for quality companies with quality revenues, quality reoccurring, and quality leadership for us that wants to stay and do so much, much bigger and better. But run your business like you're going to sell it each and every day. Drive your business decisions by KPIs. Bring in talent where necessary, experts, as David was talking about, financial experts to help you create the right models to make people interested. But really, most of the, can I use the word bullshit? Most
well,
of
it's too late now, isn't it?
Most of the calls that come in, most of the emails that you get, everybody recognizes as BS. And you can do research on private equity. You can do research on who the companies are that are acquiring and building, growing, understand who they are. And there are many ways to reach out.
Yeah, David, I'll let you. You were kind of nodding along. I'll give you a chance to respond to that real quick, and then we'll move to wrap.
I agree with you. I go to a lot of our major partner events at TD SYNNEX to have these dialogues, right? Because, and I would tell any customer of ours or potential customer of ours, if you have questions, just ask. We've been through this game. We've got tens of thousands of customers, and we've helped a number of them along the way. And so, as people get to a point where they're thinking about doing something different, come find one of us at a conference, and we're happy to make the time. Our sales organization's fairly equipped based on our experience. I can always share our story from an M&A perspective, but anything we can do to help resellers be successful, including preparing for an exit, we're happy to spend the time and do it.
Awesome. Well, fascinating discussion. We hit on a lot of really good things. I'm sure there's more topics and more parts of this that we didn't get a chance to get to, but unfortunately we are out of time. But I want to give a big thanks to David Jordan, America's CFO at TD SYNNEX, for joining us. David, if anybody wanted to learn more about TD SYNNEX, learn more about you, connect with you, where can they go? How can they find you?
I would tell you, you're welcome to hit me up on LinkedIn. You can run through our media relations group, and I'm happy to set up time to talk to anybody. And thank you very much for having me. It was a blast being on here with you guys.
Awesome. It was great having you on as well. And the next time we have you on, I'll make sure that you come in on a parachute, because I think that would be a lot of fun.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So with that, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Neil will be joining us on the other side of the show, and part 3, where we'll break down the episode. We'll have a little bit of fun, and you never know what's going to happen. That's why you got to stay tuned. We will be right back. And we are back now with part 3 of this episode of ChannelPro Weekly. Gonna wrap up the show, have a little bit of fun. But first, I want to say that was a really great interview with David Jordan from TD SYNNEX, and Neil. Neil, you had lots to say on that, and it was great when we can get two really smart people on a topic and just kind of let them go back and forth. The information was just wonderful. Rich, do you have any thoughts?
I often come away from a conversation like that with an idea or two for stories that we should run in ChannelPro, and I definitely came away from that thinking we've got to do something or other about hiring a CFO, and how big do you have to be, when do you do that, what do you look for, and so on. Because as he was talking about that, I was kind of thinking to myself, I wonder how many MSPs out there have a CFO. It's like, as you're working your way from 0 to $1 million, say you, the founder, the owner, you're probably a one-person executive team. Once you get past 1 million, you've got to start building that team. But I don't know how big the average MSP gets before they bring in a CFO, and maybe it's, you know, they're waiting too long. So there were a lot of things about that conversation that were enlightening for me and really interesting, but that was something that kind of jumped out.
Yeah, very interesting. Neil, did you have any takeaways or anything from that interview you wanted to highlight?
You know, I thought it was wonderful, you know, being able to be on a call like this, you know, with the America's CFO of TD SYNNEX, and just seeing how he thinks, and, you know, all the audience, all the attendees should just soak in the information that he provided. You know, first of all, you know, to me, I want to say this, you know, it's a pleasure, you know, being with both of you. It's a pleasure being able to share, you know, my experiences, being an older man in technology. To me, it's the dash between life and death. And what that means is I want to positively influence as many people as I can. Whenever the day comes, whatever Lord you talk to, you pray to me, it's going to be the number of people you positively impact, and the information, the knowledge that you can depart on a younger generation to have them avoid mistakes and enhance successes. You know, that's, to me, what legacy is. And thank you for giving me the ability to be able to share my thoughts with you.
Well, yeah, you're welcome. Of course, it's been great having you on. But we're not going to say goodbye to you yet, though. We're going to play a little game with you. Since this is your first time on, we'll kind of play our classic game that we've been able to play with our guests. It's called 5 Questions. So for those who might be new to the show, Rich and I are going to make up 5 questions on the fly. That's the shtick. We can't write them down in advance. And we're going to ask Neil whatever comes to mind to learn a little bit more about him. No, nothing embarrassing, no gotchas or anything, but just to learn a little bit more about you. So are you ready?
This is scary. This is scary. Sure.
All right. Neil's in the hot seat, Rich. Question number 1 to you.
All right. Thank you. So, Neil, you told us early on in the show you are a Cowboys fan. There have been a lot of great quarterbacks on that Cowboys team. Who is your all-time favorite Cowboys QB?
My all-time favorite Cowboys QB, because it was in my Dallas days, is Troy Aikman. You know, Troy back in the 90s was magnificent. He, you know, I loved him then. I love him now, you know, as a broadcaster. But, you know, Emmett, Michael, Troy, those were magnificent Dallas Cowboy days. I just pray that we get back there again. It's been a long journey.
Awesome. Yeah, it might happen. I know I had a little setback last week, but sometime down the road. So I will ask you, so you've lived in Texas your whole life, or?
No, I'm from Detroit originally, graduated Michigan State in 1982, moved to Dallas in 1983.
Okay, so you've been in Texas a long time. So you say
most of my life.
You have absorbed the culture. There are different styles of barbecue in Texas, and barbecue is a very, very big deal in Texas. What is your favorite style of barbecue?
Oh my goodness. Obviously Texas is beef, you know, barbecue. Favorite barbecue, golly, they're all so good. There's a place called, and this, people are going to laugh about this, Spring Creek Barbecue is this small barbecue that has great rolls. And for me, it's a chopped beef. Give me a chopped beef with a baked potato and a glass of unsweet iced tea, and I'm a happy man. Or a beer. I'll take a beer too.
Oh, that does sound good. A lot of good Texas barbecue places in Texas for sure.
Oh, all over the place.
We usually make it a point to go to one when we're in Dallas for events most of the time. So very cool. All right, Rich, question number 3 to you.
Yeah, and just following up on your point there, Matt, we're going to be in Dallas next week. I think this hotel we're at is somewhere near DFW. If there's a barbecue place we need to go to there, Neil, let us know, because we will actually do that next week. And you are welcome, more than welcome, to join us as well. When I met you, Neil, and I think this was very late in 2018, we were both at an Ingram Micro show, and you were wearing a cowboy hat. And I was looking for it. I can't find it. I know I have it somewhere, but I am in possession of a picture of me wearing your cowboy hat, which is a sight to see, folks. I'm not normally a cowboy hat kind of guy, but how many cowboy hats do you have?
I think it's 4 cowboy hats and about 6 pair of cowboy boots. For me, first of all, a story. One of the things that brought me from Detroit to Dallas was a country music scene. I love country music dancing, and back then, those urban cowboy days, and the excitement, the cowboy dance floor was magnificent. I'd go back up to my fraternity brothers in Michigan and say, "Oh my God, you got to check this out." And they're like, it can't be that good. And it was. That got me down to Dallas. But I have, quite a few cowboy boots have seen me at a conference. Usually I have cowboy boots on because A, they're comfortable, and B, you never know when a dance is going to break out. And you can always dance very, very well. Cowboy hats. There's a place called the Stockyards. That's something you need to do. There's 2 different bars in Dallas areas. One's Cowboy Red River, close to DFW Airport. If it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday type of thing, which is a Texas honky tonk. I love it. There's nothing like country dancing. You put your cowboy hat on, and we'll get you one. Put cowboy boots on, we'll get you dancing. Some country music on, and we'll get some girls to spin you around the dance floor.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Are you sure you want me to come to the event?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Let me tell you, I'm gonna interject one more thing. And this is something I want you guys to, I'm turning tables over here. If you could choose your last day on earth, and think about this while I'm answering mine, what would you do? For me, I'd go to a country bar with my, friends and my family. We'd have a great steak dinner. We'd sit there, listening to a great DJ or band. We would drink some Bud Long Necks and do some tequila shots and just dance the night away. And then the Lord could take me in the morning. That'd be my last day on earth, if I could choose it, of course.
Interesting. All right, Rich, well, are you going to tell us about your last day on earth?
So my first thought, there's probably no other general setting on earth where I am more relaxed and contented than on a beach somewhere. So for me, I'm probably on a lounge chair on the beach. I have an sort of endless supply of cool, refreshing cocktails kind of coming by whenever I need one. I'm with some friends, and we hang around until the sunset, and then that's that. That sounds. If I get to choose, and I've only got the one last day, that sounds pretty good.
That does sound good. For me, I'm boring. It just, with my wife and kids, doesn't matter where we are. As long as I'm with them, it's all good.
It's a lovely answer.
So, question number 4. Well, I guess that kind of was question number 4, since you kind of asked it to yourself, which I'll allow. I will allow that. So, Rich, question number 5 to you.
Well, we skipped over you. Did you have something that you were going to ask?
I guess I could do question number 5.
And we can do 6 if we need to.
Well, we could. This is my show. I can do whatever I want. But I'll just do question number 5, and I will ask. What should I ask? So well, I'll ask another Texas question because I love the Texas culture and some of the things there. So you're a Cowboys fan. You like football. Are there any other Texas things that you like? Are you into rodeo? What's the largest animal you've ever ridden or something?
I'd say a horse is the largest animal I've ever ridden. What I love about Texas is the fierce independence of Texas. What I love about Dallas, Dallas to me is a northern city in the South. You have the get her done business atmosphere attitude and the Southern hospitality and warmth and drawl and the sun shining on your face each and every day. Not each and every day, but versus Detroit, much, much more. I'm a boater, I'm a motorcycle rider. And Dallas, while it's hot, I was in Phoenix for a few days, a high of 40s, whatever. And this bald-headed guy, give me 105 degrees in the heat versus 30, 40 degrees in the cold any day. But I love Texas. I love Dallas. People, the culture, the independence. 2 things. Matt, are you going to be at the event next week also?
I will be. Okay.
This is what I need you to do for me. For Rich, on stage, you need to make sure he does a Texas hee-haw.
So
Well,
can you do one for us so that I know how to do it correctly?
Only if you do it after I do it.
Okay.
Yeehaw!
Yeehaw!
You got it.
I'm working on it.
On stage.
Rich, I'm going to hold you to that, and that's going to be awesome.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Awesome stuff. Thanks for playing 5 questions. I hope you had a lot of fun. We're not going to say goodbye quite yet because Rich is going to tell us about what we might have missed in his, in case you missed it, preview and a small preview of what is to come in the week ahead.
And you know what? Speaking of Dallas, Texas, the guy who writes In Case You Missed It for us is named James Gaskin. He lives in Dallas. We're going to see him next week, too. That'll be a lot of fun. And what James does for us every other Friday these days is sum up stuff you may have missed in the news. This week, he's got some security news for you from Arctic Wolf and Keeper Security and Trend Micro. Lenovo introduced a whole new slew of K through 12 oriented laptops and some VR software to go with them. A brand new edition of the Unified Data Protection Project or Protection product from ArcServe. And then James usually finishes that piece up with something wacky. I don't know what he has in store for us this week, but he'll have something for you there. What's coming up next week? Well, we keep talking about it. We're going to be in Dallas doing our show. That's the place to be. But if you can't make that, ThreatLocker is doing its 2023 edition of its Zero Trust World event, I believe in Florida again. That's happening next week too.
Not a week to miss. So make sure, folks, if you're anywhere near the Dallas area, make sure you come. It's going to be a big event, great event, a lot of great stuff. You will not want to miss it. Big thanks to Neil Medwed from he's the Vice President of Corporate Development and M&A at Meriplex. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you had a good time.
It was my pleasure. I had a great time. I'm going to try to rearrange things a little bit so I can be in Dallas next week.
Oh, that would be wonderful. We would love to see you in person. That would be a lot of fun. And for folks, for those who maybe can't make that event, but and meet you in person, where can they go if they want to connect with you? Where can they go? How can they find you?
For me, nmedwed@meriplex.com is my email address. Of course, LinkedIn, look Neil Medwed and connect with me. I like to share M&A news as well as other things. So yeah, please reach out to me at conferences. I'm usually at a lot of the conferences. So if you see me walking around, if you see me speaking, come shake my hand. Love to meet you.
Shake his hand, give him a big yeehaw. That's what you got to do. So Neil, thanks so much for coming on. Look forward to having you back guest host with us again sometime down the road. And with that, folks, that's going to wrap episode 254. Please go to channelpronetwork.com, make it your homepage, set it, bookmark it, do whatever. Go there every day because that's where you're going to find all the latest articles, news, white papers, downloads, resources, all kinds of stuff to help keep you on top of what's going on in this crazy industry and also help you make your business better, grow your business. We've got a lot of good resources there about that. And of course, subscribe to the ChannelPro Weekly podcast everywhere it's found. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google, we're on all of them. So just go find us there. Give it a rating if you can, or a nice comment. That's always appreciated. We're also on YouTube if you like to watch. Go there and hit the bell, hit the subscribe, hit the like, leave us a comment there. It's always very helpful. And with that, we're going to say goodbye. We will not have a show next week, I believe. Rich is nodding his head there. So because it's an event week, we'll be traveling. We won't be able to get an episode out. We'll be back the week after with episode 255. Rich, you want to give us a preview on who's coming up in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, in a couple of weeks, our guest host will be Jamison West, longtime MSP who for the last few years has been a consultant to MSPs. And it will not be the same person, but we will be getting a return visit from an executive at Cowbell Cyber, which is a cyber insurance company. You may remember the show entitled More Cowbell when their CEO joined us on the show a few years back. But we're going to have somebody else from Cowbell come on because the cyber insurance market has changed a ton since Cowbell first started selling, which was when we had them on the show. And we've spoken about that issue from the standpoint of MSPs and consultants to MSPs. We're going to talk to an actual cyber insurer 2 weeks from now, next episode of the show.
You won't want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you get all the notifications. And we will see everybody in a couple weeks. Till then, take care.